But you know what's happened now? We have no value of any kind. And so the poet writes these words. Who are we? What is our creed? We believe in Marx, Freud, and Darwin. We believe everything is okay as long as you don't hurt anyone, to the best of your definition of hurt, and to the best of your definition of knowledge. We believe in sex before, during, and after marriage. We believe in the therapy of sin. We believe that adultery is fun. We believe that taboos are taboo. We believe that everything's getting better despite evidence to the contrary. The evidence must be investigated, and you can prove anything with evidence. We believe there's something in horoscopes, UFOs, and bent spoons. Jesus was a good man, just like Buddha, Muhammad, and ourselves. He was a good moral teacher, although we think some of his good morals were basically bad. We believe that all religions are basically the same, at least the ones that we read were. They all believe in love and goodness. They only differ on matters of creation, sin, heaven, hell, God, and salvation. We believe that after death comes the nothing, because when you ask the dead what happens, they say nothing. If death is not the end and if the dead have lied, then it's compulsory heaven for all, excepting perhaps Hitler, Stalin, and Genghis Khan. We believe in Masters and Johnson. What's selected is average, what's average is normal, what's normal is good. We believe in total disarmament because we believe there are direct links between warfare and bloodshed. Americans should beat their guns into tractors and the Russians would be sure to follow. We believe that man is essentially good. It's only his behavior that lets him down. This is the fault of society. Society is the fault of conditions, and conditions are the fault of society. We believe that each man must find the truth that is right for him, and reality will adapt accordingly. The universe will readjust, history will alter. We believe that there is no absolute truth, except the truth that there is no absolute truth. We believe in the rejection of creeds and the flowering of individual thought. And then he puts this postscript. If chance be the father of all flesh, disaster is his rainbow in the sky. And when you hear state of emergency, sniper kills 10, youths go looting, troops on rampage, bomb blast school, it is but the sound of man worshipping his maker. If chance be the father of all flesh, disaster is his rainbow in the sky. And when you hear the sound of emergency, troops go looting, youth bomb blast school, it is but the sound of man worshipping his maker. Ladies and gentlemen, if we don't get this right, we slide into the abyss of total relativism in which the most powerful and the greediest and the most destructive will triumph in the end. I remember I was in Bangkok, Thailand for some meetings, and the front desk lady called me. They know me there quite well. She says, Mr. Zacharias, have you turned on your television? I said, no. Why? She said, because your country is being bombed. I said, what? She said, your country is being bombed. I didn't know what she meant. I turned it on, and what I saw was so surreal. I didn't know if that was actually happening or not. We had a donor in our ministry, a young man, who saw this happening from a distance. And his wife wrote to us a week later saying he was so despondent, he literally thought it was the end of America, the end of the world. He went into our home, took out a gun, and finished himself off. Total despair. Total despair. If God doesn't exist, the God of the Bible, the radicals who did that think they play God. They really don't. It's a political theory masquerading as a religion with a hot seedbed of hate and destruction where the only answer is killing. The moral law says this: your life is of intrinsic value and I cannot violate it. I cannot violate your life. I cannot violate your sexuality. I cannot violate your home. I cannot violate your property. I cannot violate your time. It's all sacred. If you take the 10 Commandments and put one word at the top of it, it'll be the word sacred. Life is sacred, time is sacred, property is sacred. I have no right to violate your life. I must respect it. God pays you the greatest tribute by telling you He's made you in the image of God. When Pilate looked at Jesus, he paid us the greatest tribute by looking at Jesus, putting the words, ecce homo, behold the man. Without God, there is no moral law. Without God, there is no meaning. Life has absolutely no meaning. Bertrand Russell said this, that it all ends up in a cloud of despair. There's no essential worth. There's no ultimate purpose. In the 1980s, I was doing an open forum at the University of Philippines in Manila, when a student popped out of his seat and he shouted at me. He said, everything is meaningless. I don't know why you're talking about meaning. Everything is meaningless. I said, you don't believe that. He said, I do. I said, no, you don't. He said, yes, I do. I said, you don't. He said, who are you to tell me I don't? I said, repeat it. He said, everything is meaningless. I said, you don't mean that. He said, I do. I said, can I ask you a question? If everything is meaningless, then what you just said was not meaningful. On the other hand, if what you just said was meaningful, then everything is not meaningless. In effect, you've really said nothing. You know what happened after that meeting? I was walking out with some of the guys who had brought me in. I generally need some ushers to get me out. So he was taking me out, and I saw this guy standing at the back of the hall saying, if everything is meaningless and everything. That night he came to the local church where I was doing evangelistic meetings. When I gave the invitation, he was the first one up at the altar on his knees before God, finding meaning for the first time. That's exactly what Oscar Wilde meant. Did you love any one of them for their own sakes? You are loved by God for your own sake. God doesn't want you to be anybody else. He's wired you. He's framed you. He's made you as a distinctive and a unique individual. Honor that investment by the distinctive splendor that He has given to you individually. Don't try to be somebody else. Accept the way He's made you as a unique gift that is distinctively yours. That is distinctively yours. You know, we had all kinds of problems in our home today. The basement got flooded, and one of the drawers in the kitchen broke. And all this was going on, and my wife has gone to Toronto, so I'm taking care of all of that like a nice husband at home. So I sent her a nice email and said, you picked the perfect day to do this. And so I called a friend of mine. I said, could you help me fix this drawer? He showed up, and he spent about 40-50 minutes, made a brace like this, did that. And I stood there and thought to myself, I'm an absolute fool when it comes to these things. My father-in-law looked at the toolbox in my home once and said, is this a toy box or a toolbox? You should see my hammer. I could put it in my pocket. I have absolutely no ability with those things. The Bible talks about, and the day shall come when the carpenter shall encourage the goldsmith. Right? A goldsmith works with fine, precious jewelry with an eye for the precious. A carpenter with the rough-hewn stuff, and the man with the rough hands can encourage the man working with the fine, precious jewelry. I don't know how He's made you, but He's given your life meaning. You know, I travel all over the globe. Pastor Johnny and I were talking today and to one of the young people at dinner. In my life, I've traveled through over 60 countries in the last 30-some years. When I started, I had black hair, then I got white hair. Now I'm praying for just hair, if I could have it. And I just think of all of the hours of fatigue and all of this that actually goes on. And then I come back home and get off the plane, and I come back into the house and want to get on my knees and kiss the kitchen floor because I'm home. And one of my kids will run up and just hug and say, hi, Dad. It's worth traveling on those long hauls just to come back and have that, or your wife's arm around you and say, love you, so glad you're back. If our human value means so much to us, think of what the divine accolade is going to mean when you hear the words, well done. Well done, thou good and faithful servant. That's why Augustine said, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee. God's made you for a purpose. All the tiny little purposes become purposeful because your life itself has purpose. If you don't have ultimate purpose, all these tiny little purposes are nothing else but ways of tranquilizing your boredom. God's given you a unique calling. Meaning, meaning, meaning. God's given that to you. But the third thing, He doesn't just promise you a moral framework, doesn't just promise you meaning. For the atheist, it is not there. The atheist has no hope. There's no hope beyond the grave. When life comes to an end, it's gone. It's finished like a vapor. You know, I've just finished my latest book, and it's called Has Christianity Failed You? And I talked to people with all kinds of questions about why they walked away from God. And one of the stories, I met a woman in India whose story I'd known and sat and chatted on it. It's a true story. Lovely young gal, fell in love with a young Indian man and wanted to marry him. But the parents told her that he came from a lower caste, not to please go down the rung of the ladder. She pled with them because she said she loved him. Parents would not give the blessing, so they both eloped. It's very interesting. She was willing to violate the inextricable law of caste, which is intricately woven into the law of karma. Just remember that line. The law of caste, which is inextricably woven into the law of karma. Because of a certain karmic previous life, you're born in the new caste. This is the doctrine that is espoused by tens of millions. So the parents said, no, he's of a different caste. They both eloped, got married. She was posted into another city and went to work there. Days went into weeks, weeks went into months. They were making a living. Met up with another man, quote, attracted to him, stopped corresponding with her husband, communicating with him. He began to suspect something was going on. He said, please give up the job and come back. We can't live like this apart the whole time. She said, no, this is a good job. I've got a good career. So he took a train and went over, fearing some things. Found out it was true. She'd been betraying her trust and told him that she had met somebody else and wanted to marry him. He said, look, when you and I got married, my parents disowned me. Your parents disowned you. We had nobody left in this world except each other. And now you're walking out on me. Please don't do that. He pleaded and begged. Young woman across the table there talking, it would have nothing to do with it. Finally, he said to her, if you don't want me, I'm going to have to go back, of course. I can't force you. He went away for some few minutes, came back. He said, please do me a favor. I really do love you. I'd ask you to just lie down next to me for a few minutes so I could hold you close and then leave, but you won't let me. Let me just put my head on your lap for 30 minutes and close my eyes and enjoy my nearness to you for just 30 minutes. Would you let me do that? Just let me put my head on your lap. He did. She did. Unknown to her, he had taken a very deadly poison when he had stepped out and died on her lap. Years have gone by. The memory was haunting her, terrified. I said, what was the answer to this? She couldn't get away from the trauma of it, so she went to see a Hindu priest. And he took her astrological chart and his astrological chart and the date they were married and so on, and said to her, I have the answer for you. In your previous life, when you were a little girl, he raped you. And this was now his karma of what happened at your hands. So you don't need to feel guilty about this at all. It was the karma that he had earned from his past rapacious act in the previous life. A brilliant, successful, businesswoman across the table who eased her conscience on this by believing that in the previous life she'd been raped by this man and therefore he was getting his due rewards. You know, the human heart longs for some freedom. Freedom from guilt, freedom from wrong, and freedom ultimately from the chains of death. I'll give you this little story and close with my final thought. You know, my father-in-law, my wife's visiting her mother in Toronto, and I'll be joining her next in just 2 or 3 days. I'm holding some meetings there, so we'll be together. But 4 years ago, she lost her father very suddenly. He was 85. From diagnosis to death in cancer, it was 4 months. Robust, healthy, fine man. I don't know if I've known a better man closely in my life than him. The perfect gentleman. Never saw him get into a car first without letting his wife in first. Never saw him sit down before he pulled the chair to let his wife sit down or his daughter sit down. He was the quintessential gentleman. I mean it. And when we lost him and lost in my father-in-law, a man I so revered, my children just treasured him. But he shriveled down in the last 4 months as the cancer began to eat away at him, and he was so distraught because he never wanted to be seen with such indignity. He came down to a bag of bones, and then for a long time even couldn't speak. I went and spent some time with him and told him how much his life had meant, what a light it had been to so many. He was a World War II veteran. Great engineer, worked for Shell Oil all of his career, 30-some years. Churchman, devout elder, godly man, daily with his Bible and his hymn book. And then lost his ability to speak. And his daughters were gathered around his bed before I was on my way flying. I was somewhere literally in midair. Spoke to him on the phone saying, "Dad, I'm coming." And as the last breaths were entering his body, he managed to get just enough strength to say these 2 things. I've quoted him in my book, The Grand Weaver. He looked at his wife of 65 years and he mouthed the words, "Jean, I love you." And then he lifted his eyes to the heavens and he said this, "Amazing, just amazing." And he was gone.